Welcome, everybody, to the last session of the Phys Ed Summit 2016. Wow, about said 2015. 2016. I'm here with Dr. Stephen Harvey out of West Virginia University. And man, I tell you what, this has been just an awesome 24 hours. Stephen and I were just talking about assessments, and that's what he's going to be talking to you about today. So you're going to hear some confirmations on some really good teaching practices for you in assessments, and you're going to hear some new things as well. I hope that you will open up the presentation in the Tozzle page so you can follow along. There's some interactive parts, and I hope you got a little move your furniture a little bit. I hear there might be some movement going on, so looking forward to Stephen's presentation. A couple things as we get started, and I know there's been some tech issues. I haven't had any because I'm on Google Chrome, and Google Chrome seems to work really best with what we're doing. Or you can just refresh your page. That may work as well. I am following along on Tozzle, and I will relay the messages to Dr. Harvey, and we're gonna have a really good time being in the bullpen, finishing up the closer. So without further ado, I forgot one thing. I am still rocking my Phys Ed Summit pink shirt for my wife, Kathleen, who thankfully is sleeping. But appreciate the PE community just standing beside us, but also standing beside breast cancer awareness. Wow, didn't realize just how much cancer can affect your life, but also the amount of people that it affects. So really thankful that everybody's coming alongside with us and being Bodie strong. All right, Dr. Harvey, it is all you, buddy.
Sounds good. Thank you, William. Obviously, the first thing to say is thanks to everyone for being here, and obviously the Phys Ed Summit team for putting on the 24-hour summit. I was at not the first presentation yesterday, but the second one, and I watched quite a lot yesterday. I was up in the night getting energized from Andy Milne and Justin Schleider, etc. And then I'm here first thing in the morning. So I've got my breast cancer awareness t-shirt on as well. So
all right,
there you go. So here we go. So we're going to talk today. I'm going to share my presentation. As a reminder, please go to the Tozzle and open up the presentation in your own browser, because there are some interactive elements where I would enjoy it if you could participate in typing into the presentation where required. So here we go. Let me bring the slides up. So you're going to see probably us again. So here we go. Is that good, William? You can see that.
It's good.
Right. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about some background pertaining to assessment, a little bit about how, what, and who to assess. I know this is being covered in some previous presentations by Amy, who's participating here, so shout out to Amy. And there was one on the 4 domains of assessment yesterday, and there was just one by Jace Ferguson. So that'll cover that, and then we'll look at what you came for today, which is the practical examples. And then if there's time, we can have some questions, and there will be parts within the presentation where we can deal with questions as they come into the Tozzle. So here we go. As you can tell, I am not a West Virginian. I am from the UK. Me and Andy Milne always have a laugh and a joke. So we've been giving shout outs to go Team GB after the Olympics. But obviously I'm here in the US. I got involved in game-centered approaches when I did my teacher training or my teacher education at Loughborough, which is where Bunker and Thorpe and Armand and colleagues generated the initial impetus in the UK for teaching for understanding. And then I now work at WVU, and I've got a slide in a sec. I'll show you some of the facilities we have. I've been a researcher in game-centered approaches for about 13 years. And I do some work for USA Field Hockey over here and the US Olympic Committee. So I try and do a little bit of work with teachers, and that's my main job, but I also work a little bit with sports coaches and governing bodies as well. This is West Virginia University. This is our football stadium. Go Mountaineers, and Mountaineers go first. They're our two big shouts at the moment. The football stadium hosts about 60,000 people. The Coliseum holds about 10,000. This is where I'm sitting now in this building up here. And this is the front of our building, where we're very fortunate to have a turf field and things right out front for physical activity. And then this is our women's soccer practice facility. Because I'm British, I'm a soccer fiend. So I'll be watching the Middlesbrough today as my team. So off we go. These are my contact details. I know what it's like when you get down to the end of the presentation. I've put these in the tozzle as well. But if you need, I'm at, the big thing I want to say about this, well, two things are, first of all, I'm at 946 followers on Twitter. So if you can get me up to 1,000 by the end of the summit, we've got about an hour, that would be great. I'm also on Voxer. There's a number of us, and I know Nathan Horn is listening in. We also have a Voxer group on TGFU that Jorge Rodriguez has done a fine job with setting up, a new member of the Physipedagogy team. So you can get me on Voxer, and also you can join the TGFU Voxer group. The one thing I forgot to say is this emblem in the top right of the presentation is our Teaching Games for Understanding SIG. It's a special interest group of ISEP. And we have a website, www.tgfu.info, and we have lots of information and resources at that website. We are building a number of resources as we go, and we did 4 presentations at the last PhysEd Summit, one on an intro to TGFU, one on invasion games, one on net war games, and I did one on questioning. So if you want to go back to them and revisit them to connect the dots, then they're obviously available on the Physipedagogy YouTube channel. This is my website where I post general ramblings. So here we go. This is a participation slide. So what I want to know is a little bit about you. So if you can go pop in, click on the document and just put your name and the country that you're from on this slide, and then I'm going to ask you for your Twitter handle in a minute. So off we go. Should I give you 30 seconds like a good teacher?
So Stephen, it may be because I've been up so long. I don't see your link to your presentation.
On the tozzle?
Yeah.
So it's
I see the Shape America grade level outcomes.
It's just right there underneath the video. Can you see the tozzle screen?
You know, it's funny, I can see your tozzle screen, but I
don't know.
It's funny, I don't.
Well, people can
well, you know, it's funny, nobody else is saying that but me. I thought, well, maybe I need to refresh my page then. How about that?
Well, I put it up, like I say, I popped it on the tozzle. Jerry said he found it.
I see it now. It's funny, I took my own advice and I refreshed the page. All right, let's carry on.
So I don't know, Bob's just put it in the tozzle as well, Bob Knipe. So I'm not seeing much editing. I'm sure I opened it up for people to be able to edit. So hopefully we'll get a little bit of editing going on here. Do I need to come out of presenter mode maybe to, let me jump out here. There you go. I can see a couple of people have joined in now, so we're getting there. So Bob's on the ball, so that's the least I would expect after seeing Bob's presentation yesterday. Marie, Bill, obviously moderating. Cassie, who's also put information on the tuzzle. So I'll give you another 15, 20 seconds. So we'll just get our...
yeah, several people are opening it up. I can see there's probably...
Yeah.
All right, let's go.
So and then on the next one, so people like, you know, Bob and Bill and Lance, if you put your stuff in, if you go to the next slide, you can pop in a email address and a Twitter handle. I know you might have done this on the tuzzle, but if you want to pop it in on here, that would be helpful. If you need to delete a line underneath because it's going to wrap, we don't have that that many. There you go. And then if there isn't things on the tuzzle that you need to follow up with, or if I want to connect with you guys, add you to my Twitter handle, I can do that, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's what I've been trying to tell everybody is to share their Twitter handles, their Voxer handles. You know, this is a great way to build your network and share a lot of information, not just today, but, you know, all the time.
Yep. Well, I think, you know, I'm in the university setting, and I've met an incredible amount of teachers just by engaging on Twitter. So it's been a very positive experience for myself. So it looks like we've got a nice crowd of about people with us. So that's great. I appreciate people being here at this time in the morning. So while you finish that off, if you're typing, you need to stand up. What we're going to do is I've got 3 songs for you, and they are my children and my wife's favorite songs of the moment. So he's the first one. So you have to stand up, do a dance. If you want to take a selfie and post it on Twitter, then I don't have necessarily a prize, but if I find a really good one, I might be able to bundle together a couple of goodies from our university and send them to you. So here we go. So are we ready? So you should be up doing the Gangnam style. Whoop, 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 whoop. Gangnam style. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Right, there we go. So that's our first physical activity energizer. And before we get into it, so I know we've took 10 minutes to get everyone to put their information in and everything, but I appreciate it. So we're going to start with a little bit of background. So hopefully you enjoyed getting up. So to get to the formal stuff, Top and Tannehill have defined assessment as a variety of tasks and settings where students are given opportunities to demonstrate. So I'll share my screen again, sorry. of writing tests settings where students are given opportunities to demonstrate their knowledge, skill, understanding, and application of content in a context that always that allows continued learning and growth. Now, this quote is very, very important when you look at game-centered approaches such as teaching games for understanding, because what we need to do is give students opportunities. What that means is we need to do this in gameplay to demonstrate their knowledge, skill, and understanding. And what this means is, like the presentation yesterday, we need to look at assessment across the different domains of learning. And obviously, Metzler would argue the cognitive domain is prefaced in games for understanding. But if you're like myself and believe in a more monist kind of view of things, where you don't believe the mind and body are separated, then clearly there's an interaction between cognition and motor learning and motor processing. Now, there was a study done by Strout and Morton in 1989. The study was called Blueprints for Learning. It was published in the Journal of Teaching Physical Education. They asked some elementary teachers what were the most important things they thought about when planning a lesson. They also asked them what were the least important things. The most important things that they found were that the teachers ranked activity goals and objectives as the most important thing, followed by activity organization, and then student performance level. The least important things they rated were the season of the year, evaluation of students, and student enjoyment. Now, if you look, I've highlighted the ones in red. So your job is to think about the Columbo routine. So Columbo always sits there, scratches his head, and says, "I'm sorry, but there's something I don't really understand." So he acts like the naive detective. So there's something I don't understand about this either. So what I want you to do is think about, why would teachers rate the level of student performance as most important and evaluation of students as least important? So if you want to just get into the presentation, just jot a couple of ideas down on this on slide 13. That would be fan dabby dozy. So while people do that, William, are there any things coming up on the Tozzle that I see people have been talking about? There's been difficulty getting on, taking selfies as they've been done since. That was good.
But people are starting to fill on that top. They're starting to fill out your sheet there. That's good.
Yeah, and you can delete where it says answer 1 or answer 2. You can just delete that and type over it. That's totally fine. So we've got a nice couple of comments coming in, possibly because teachers didn't know how to assess effectively. We're natural problem solvers. They possibly weren't taught at university about planning assessment when they plan, or planning the evaluation of students. So that's a good point. An excellent point by looking at teacher performance versus student learning and the importance of that. So that's very interesting. I'll get rid of that one for you. So curriculum being fixed, so it takes away creativity and adjusting for the different times of the year. So some interesting, very interesting stuff here. Is there anything you want to pick up from this yourself, William?
You know, it's funny, when I was looking at the list, you know, evaluation of students was the least important, but I feel like that may be, I don't know, a little misinterpreted, because I feel like as physical educators, we always evaluate students. And so I feel like the evaluation of students is extremely important. The process of how we do it is why maybe a lot of people are here, because assessments to me is different than assessments to you. That's different from assessments to someone else that's watching. And I think that's where some of us get kind of caught up in all the quagmire and all the muck of what we're doing. Is what is good practice in assessments? And I think that's why you see so many presentations on assessments, because it is important. I think evaluating our students is super important.
Yeah, and I think the next slide really hits that home, what William was just describing, and hopefully summarizes a little bit what people have been putting on here. Remember, the study was done in 1989. I think there's been a bigger push in university programs, more recently, to focus on assessment. But like a couple of people in their discussions here, like person just typing here, university experience was focused on skill teaching and not much on evaluation. So what we find, I know a couple of other presenters have talked about this, is we've got to move away from behavioral assessment of learning to assessing for learning, which is what's written at the bottom. And what that means is, and again with university education a little bit at the moment, is what we're trying to encourage is this constructivist approach to teaching and learning, where students are given feedback, they're given some ideas on how to improve their not just performance, but how to engage more deeply in their learning, and be given information on how they can do that. So focusing very much on the process rather than the product. So we're moving away from behavioral assessment, like did they come, did they change did they dress down, change their shoes, and did they look as though they were putting a little bit of effort in, so let's give them an A, to, well, let's make students more accountable for what it is that they're doing. And as we've seen with the SHAPE grade level outcomes from SHAPE America, the national organization in the US, there's been a push to try and increase that accountability, and that helps with the credibility of physical education in the curriculum. But the main take homes as well is what we tend to find is it's a bit like the fitness gram. You end up taking time out of your teaching to actually do the assessment. And what we need to do is, and the previous presenter Jace talked about this, is this notion of universal design for learning, or backward design, which we learn in standards-based assessment. We need to design assessment tasks in order that we can teach and assess at the same time, and therefore simplify the assessment process. And like I said, build the assessment for learning into the activities that we deliver. So I have a little plan for a question break before another little physical activity. So are there any burning questions? Otherwise, I will move on.
I think you're good, Stephen. I think we're everybody's interactive there, so they're following more along on your presentation than the TOSL, but that is perfectly fine.
Yeah, well, we can keep moving. So we've got another physical activity energizer here. So if we stand up, favorite song. I love it. I don't care. And I'm going to stop it there because there's a swear word on this one, so I can't continue. So I say it's my daughter's favorite song, and she's 5, but she hasn't worked out that yet, I don't think. So I'm quite fortunate. Right. So how, what, and who we assess. So as has been talked about just now, and other previous presentations have looked at, we've basically got assessment in. So if we divide the screen, to the left and to the right, on the left we've got formative, and on the right summative assessment. What traditionally we ended up doing was participation, effort. That's kind of a summative grade that we assign. So summative assessments allow us to help grade the students. The other thing is, if we do performance assessment like a written quiz, Usually that can take time out of because we do that on the last day of instruction. And also we end up using norm reference criteria where we compare across students, or we have, you know, a sort of level that is associated with an A, B, or a C, or a D. The problem is that when we do this type of summative assessment, it doesn't help us with our teaching. We actually find out at the end what all the issues were about what students should have been learning, and don't correct that within our teaching. So what we need to do is focus a little bit more on formative assessment. That doesn't mean we shouldn't summatively assess, but hopefully what I'll talk about here is that we can do formative assessment that also helps you create summative grades for students as well. Formative assessment helps you teach, leads back to goals and objectives, which is very important, again, with a game-centered approach, because your goals and objectives are going to be different in a game-centered approach than they are if you use direct instruction or whether you use sport education, etc. And what we need to do is we need to build this assessment into the lessons. And therefore, we focus on a student being kind of compared to a criteria. And this actually helps with teaching, because we can give students the information up front, and they can actually know how they're being assessed by the teacher, or how they're assessing each other if it's peer assessment, and what they need to do to get better and improve. So what we're recommending is that we can devise a lot of simple forms of recording, share those with the students. We would have teachers sample student behaviors throughout different lessons. So myself and Hans van der Mars would agree that there's a possibility to pick a small group of students each lesson and focus your attention on them and get detailed information on them with respect to different rubrics. Always use formative assessment, and always use the criterion reference scale. Now, the problems we have, and I think that's why people are here, is we need to generate a grading system and identify a specific criteria. And I think when we get down to game-centered approaches, the criteria and the descriptions of what students should be doing or should be learning is where we get a little bit hazy. So hopefully, as we move forward, we will get to that. So the next participation activity is coming. So I want you to put on the next slide, on slide 21, the types of assessment that you currently use. Now, this doesn't mean in a game-centered approach. It just means more broadly types of assessment you use. So what I mean by this is, do you have students keep a journal? So that would be a type of assessment. So if you go on to this slide and just note down a couple of things you have that you currently use, types of assessment you currently use. So we've got some good stuff coming up, journals, and then also we've got some ideas on who people are assessing or how they're going about that assessment in terms of, there's a lot of comments about people using peer assessment and self-assessment, because that obviously takes away from the teacher needing to do everything, as long as you obviously teach the students how to do that. Again, nice simple forms of assessment where people have got exit tickets, you to get an idea of how students are engaging in the material and things like that. Now I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about forms of assessment as well. So some people on here are talking about rubrics. And rubric to me would, or the way Judy Rink would describe it, would be a form of assessment. But we will We'll come to that in a sec. We can also see that there's some information here relative to cognitive domain. Also some maybe related to, like with the teacher observation, some skill assessment. And then we've also got heart rate self-checks, which would build in the notion of physical activity as well. And someone's just putting up small group discussion. So these were, people can keep going, I'll flip back to that. So these are some of the things I noted down. I think observation is something that we use probably the most. And if we are using observation, it could be by the teacher, by peers, or you could kind of watch yourself, because if you use video, which someone suggested, you can do that. Some people may decide to use written tests and quizzes. Like I say, sometimes, depending on how those are used, they might not be assessment for learning, but it depends what you do with that material. If you're using exit tickets with quizzes and things like that, then that might be a little bit more related to the assessment for learning. Journals, portfolios, event tasks might be, you might ask students to design a game of their own and look how they engage with the process of sharing and patience, like Joanne was talking about yesterday in her TGFU presentation. And then you might have, again, skill tests. Again, we tend not to do so many skill tests within game-centered approaches because we try and do that skill assessment within the game forms. So people have got MVPA tracking now. People are using questioning, perceived exertion skills, so small group discussion. So the types of assessment to me are, like if we take something like questioning, necessarily to me that might not be a type of assessment, but it might be that it's something like you say, a quiz, which then what you need to do is have some way of examining. If you ask questions to students, well, when they say stuff back to you, you have to have some way of assessing that. And that's where you come in with the forms of assessment. So the forms of assessment, I'm going to go back first. We can have checklists, which might be, did you bring your shoes? Did you dress down? And did you do what the teacher told you to do? Yeah, you know, those very simple forms of assessment. Now, what I would argue is if your unit is on game-centered approaches and there's a very big focus on the cognitive and psychomotor domain, I probably would use a checklist for the affective domain. Now, I know what Joanne was saying yesterday, where she wanted to increase the importance of the affective domain. But if that was the case, then I would use a rating scale or a rubric for that. So you've got to think about why you would use these different forms of assessment. And when we say form, we don't mean like writing on a form. We just mean the different sort of ways to go about assessing. To go up to the top, rubrics are the most comprehensive form of assessment. So if someone is doing a portfolio, you could create a rubric, and the rubric would have the skill behaviors. And we're going to look at some of these in a minute. The skill behaviors down the left, and then, you know, you might have meets, is developing, is meeting, and then is exceeding target. And you might have within your overall assessment, grade 8 might be when you want certain people or more people meeting a target rather than just developing that, particularly with a game-centered approach. And then rubrics are used for complex behaviors, and they're usually therefore related to skill performance. So I'm going to show you some rubrics that Hans van der Maas and I developed that he uses in his Complete Guide to Sport Education book. Then you've got rating scales, and they sit in the middle of the rubric and checklist. So the rating scale gives a rating 1, 2, and 3, and it has, within that rating scale, there's like a little bit of a checklist. So if students do 2 of the 3 following behaviors, then they get rated a 2. If they do all 3, they get rated a 3. So something like that. So it's when you design your assessments for your unit, and when you think about what you're going to deliver, you have to think about which form of assessment you're going to use and for which type. So I use rubrics for observation, for example. But you could also use a checklist with observation. It just depends. You might also have students assess each other using the checklist, because that might be more manageable for them, particularly if they're younger students. And then finally, before we get down to our little question break and activity, who can assess? So here we've got an instructor observing and assessing. Obviously, we can have students self-assess. So this is a little, I know it's not very big, let me make it a little bit bigger. So this is like a problem scenario that you could give out to students, and they could talk through what they would do. You could provide them with a checklist or a rubric, and they would self-assess themselves on that checklist or rubric. Similarly, you could have peer assessment, where you give out, you set students up in teams of 3 and have 3 courts. So you assign 3 teams to one court, 3 to another, 3 to another. And what they do is 2 teams play, 1 team observes one of the teams playing. And for this particular day, their focus is on assessing on the ball play. And these are some levels which this could be exceeds, this could be, these ones in the middle could be developing, and this one could be sorry, this one could be meeting, and this one could be developing. And we're going to look at some of these in a little bit more detail on the subsequent slides. And then finally in this section, you know, as I've talked about, a good task design for your lesson is one where you're able to assess across these multiple domains. But what I would say to you is you need to think about the form of assessment in relation to the type of assessment that you're using. So if, like I say, for me, in some of my TGFU stuff, I tend to focus a little bit more on the psychomotor and cognitive domain. So I would probably use rating scales or rubrics for these elements, but I would then have checklists for an affective domain, and maybe again a rating scale for physical activity. And I'm going to take you through some examples in a sec.
So, Stephen, we have a question on Tazel before we get to your question. So, and this is a big problem, is class sizes, or the amount of kids that we have to assess compared to the time that we have. We know that it's important to assess these kids. We know it's these kids need this great feedback. You know, what would be your advice to teachers that have these kind of issues? How can we quickly assess some kids where we have those type of constraints?
Well, I think you know, planning is obviously very important. So having, and we're going to look at some rubrics in a second that are already designed. The good thing about the rubrics is it tells you as the teacher and the students what type of behaviors are expected for different levels of performance or levels of learning. And that then enables you to sample students pretty quickly, you know, within the activities. And if you use some technology like Google Form and things like that, you can quickly assign grades to the students, you know. So what you want to do eventually is once you've got your teaching going in the unit, you can hopefully sample a small group of students per lesson. And I appreciate that if you've got, like some of our student teachers have a class of 45, that becomes a lot more challenging than if you have got a smaller class. But that's where, if I had larger classes, I might put think about where, like for me, it might be the psychomotor element might be what I do, and then I might have students engage in some peer or self-assessment with some of the other elements that were important but maybe weren't important for that particular grade level. So that would be some of my suggestions. But we can come back to that, you know, and using technology. I know the teachers, there's some discussion on class dojos, and we had Autocrat and things like that that we talked about with Adam and Mel yesterday. So I think using some of those technology tools would be important. So this is my last song, my wife's favorite song. And so I'm doing the Usain Bolt at the moment, lightning. I should take myself a selfie and I'll put it on Twitter. I'll do it later. Okay, so this is what you came for, hopefully. So I'm sorry it's took a little bit of time to get here. I'm getting my money's worth here. So going back to Seedentop and Tannehill, what they would suggest is it's very important to, this backward design. So you get your goals and learning outcomes for the unit. So I want students to be better at maintaining possession of the ball and progressing the ball up the field. I'm not too bothered about whether they score lots of goals, but this is what I'm interested in. Once you've established that, then what you can do is think about tasks that could be designed in order to develop that are authentic and enable to get to your instructional intentions, focus on the content and skills you want students to attain, allow students to progress, are interdisciplinary, and measure a variety of goals. Now, saying that, what I would suggest to you as teachers is you want interdisciplinary assessment, but that's why I'm saying to you, if you think about the forms of assessment, keep your life simple. If you're going to have a very complex skill assessment on using one of the rubrics that we're going to talk about, you don't want to have a rubric for everything because you won't be able to get around all the students. So in a particular unit, you might have a focused target, like if it is the affective domain, you want that to be the rubric, the big assessment, and that might be what you take care of. Whereas with some of the other elements, with the skill feedback and that kind of thing, you might put the onus on the students. And obviously you need to start small with that and build that up across the unit. And I appreciate that's easier said than done. So what we do with our students, one last thing, I don't think it's really that important to assess every single domain in every single unit. However, and having said that, we have our students complete these assessment reports. So these are pretty useful. I hadn't seen these before I came to WVU. So let me just bring this one up. So William, you can see this, right?
Yep, I can see it.
So what we get the students to do is come up with their unit objectives, and we actually demand, rightly or wrongly, that they come up with a unit objective for each learning domain. So this is one that I did with the students for a tag rugby unit. If you want to access this report, just copy and paste the link, or the link is in the tozzle to the assessment report. So what we did here is we motor assessment, which is very much focused on like a rubric / rating scale, where we're looking at motor skills and movement patterns. So we're looking at technical skills, but also tactical skills. And remember, in a game-centered approach, it's not techniques or tactics. It's the use of techniques within tactical situations. So a lot of people say techniques are the tools for tactics. That's absolutely fine. So what we don't do is dismiss the technical learning, but what we do is we try and situate the descriptions of those techniques within a tactical situation. And again, you'll see how we'll do this in a minute. So we set up these unit objectives. We put them on the left-hand side of this assessment report, and then we describe in the middle how we're actually going to go about measuring the student learning. So we say the student needs to demonstrate ratings of a 2 or a 3. So that's 1 is developing, 2 is meeting, and 3 is exceeding. So they've got to meet or exceed ratings on the rubrics that we develop for on the ball play, off the ball play, passing and defending, because they're the 4 elements of my unit. And then I'm going to design tasks to enable them to learn about off the ball play, and then I'm going to assess that within what it is that I'm doing. We were able to do 4 things in our unit because we had multiple students working with small groups, but you might decide to focus just on and off the ball play in your unit and not worry too much about passing and defending. And this continues down, and then what the student needs to do at the end is write a little bit of an analysis of the student learning data. So the point of us having this report is it helps you with planning. So it gets back to the point of Stroot and Morton, as if you don't plan what your assessments are going to be and how you're going to measure student learning, irrespective of class size and things like that, you're not going to be able to do it. So that is the purpose of this report. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. So what I want you to do is, these are the Shape America PE standards, grade level outcomes. So a lot of us in the United States are working towards these, but I think these are quite good. These look at technical, tactical skills that students need, and affective skills, and health and physical activity behaviors we want students to exhibit. You can think about how what grade level outcomes are being met in some of these activities and assessments. So here we go. So in an invasion game, this is one that I used on my questioning presentation at the last summit. So we've got a 3-on-3 game here in a sort of 10-by-15 area. It's a handball game, or it could be, you could play this with the ball on the floor. The blue player passes out to the other blue player. They play 3-on-3. And it says the game is to develop off-the-ball movement and support. But actually what we're going to do in this game is assess students' on the ball play. And again, you could have 3-on-3 playing, 3 observers on the side, and every few minutes they rotate in, and by the end you provide them with this rubric, and by the end they actually can do some peer assessment on each other. So here's the rubric. Now the purpose of this rubric is, and these haven't been validated yet, but they are in Siedentop, Hasey and van der Maas's book, and if you buy this book, the new edition, there's a CD-ROM and all these rubrics are available on them. Okay, if you email me, I can send you a link to that. But what we've got here is on the ball play. What we do is, for 1 or 2 lessons, our focus as the teacher is to play this game and do some like 2v1 practices associated with this game and look at these behaviors. So does the student pass to open teammates effectively using a variety of passes? What I tend to find is, you know, if we're playing this game and all someone's doing is using a chest pass, then that's not going to be as effective. So here, when student is meeting, what they're going to do is need more time to move the ball, and they're going to use a reduced number of passes. They may also have a hot potato syndrome, where when they get the ball, all their aim is to do is to get it to the next person, irrespective of the game situation. Now, these give you an idea of how students might behave within these different games. So, for example, again, regularly selects the correct type of pass for the given defensive pressure. So again, if someone's all over you or coming at you very quickly, and there's an option for a short pass, then you want to get that pass off, and to be safe, you want to use a chest pass. If you recognize that the team are playing a full press on you and someone's available in behind, that necessitates you do a long one-handed pass. So do you recognize these situations, and can you attribute different skills like chest pass, long pass to those different scenarios? So that is the psychomotor domain assessment. And as I'm describing this, remember what we're trying to do is write technical competence within tactical situations. So we're not necessarily worried about whether I have the perfect right technique in terms of nearly all the critical elements, but I'm also looking at what critical elements are we using within the particular game situation. My next rubric is a little bit out there, and I looked for Shape America grade level outcomes, and you can see them in the bottom here. And I really struggled with this one because this is a rubric I developed to assess creativity in physical education, and I'm really pocketing this along the cognitive domain. So if we go back to our task, another thing that we could do if we weren't bothered about so much on the psychomotor level is we could assess the bottom 2 behaviors, which would be commensurate with a more affective domain, but we could also look at students' ability to think of a range of ideas and tactics and solutions. So this is the notion of where you could use questioning as the teacher, have a tactical timeout, and then go around and listen to different groups of students and assign them bronze, silver, or gold, or developing, meeting, or exceeding, depending on their range and ability to think of new ideas. So this relates to this notion of inquiry, where you're not necessarily guiding students to one solution, but you're trying to encourage students to come up with different solutions to different behaviors, because that's important in games, because we want people to be creative. And like I say, I really struggled for this top one in Shape America's grade level outcomes to find anything that would relate to these things at the top. Another thing that I've found effective, and this might be really effective for the affective domain, which Joanna talked about yesterday, is putting students in scenarios. So this is a different task to this one. So this one now is a game scenario, an action fantasy game scenario, where teams of 3-on-3 play basketball to one basket. You tell them that one team are winning, so the Tigers are 70 points and they're beating the Wildcats and they've only got 64. One team plays as the Tigers, one team plays as the Wildcats. What I'm going to do with this assessment is use it for affective domain behaviors. What I want to do is look at students who get excited and start shouting at players because there's a time constraint, there's only 5 minutes left for play. Or do we have students who take a leadership role, who stay calm in a pressure situation? And for this, I can do my affective domain assessment by putting students in a game scenario where there's a time pressure on it. We can look at some of the behaviors here. So does the student practice hard? Do they accept advice? Do they participate with enthusiasm, etc.? So these are some things that you can assess in the affective domain. They might not all relate to this particular game scenario, but I've put down some ratings here on how you could do an affective assessment within this game scenario. I'm trying to push on a little bit here because I know I'm taking up a little bit of time. So with physical activity, Scruggs and colleagues came up with a notion that elementary students would get between 62 to 66 steps per minute within a lesson. So if you've got the ability to get hold of some pedometers while students are participating in these different types of activities, you could put some pedometers on them and see if they can meet a criteria for a checklist of how many steps a minute do they get. And you might do a, sorry, not a checklist, a rating scale. So you might assess students who get up to the 60 steps a minute as meeting your requirement. Those who get above 66 steps a minute might get exceeding, and those who fall below that might get 50 steps a minute. They might be getting a rating of 1. And this might be done where it's a simple case of self-assessing. So you don't want to necessarily be giving students grades because their physical activity might be down a particular day, but it might be that you can use the physical activity where it's just a self-check behavior and an exit ticket where students look at the pedometer before they go out, note that down on a pre-prepared sheet, turn that into an index card, turn that into the teacher, and then take it from there. So that is that's that. Now I know I focused on an invasion game. I do have all the same information for a net wall game. So this is the net wall game. I won't go into this game, and I take you through getting you guys to think about, like in this, the game is very focused on ball and shuttle placement because this is half a badminton court and we assign the badminton court to different zones. So we're looking at students working on placement of the shuttle or ball into these different zones. They play mini games to 3 points. If they get an outright winner into any of these zones, then they win that zone and the game starts back at 0-0. So what we could do is in this rubric, for psychomotor, maybe we can just have a go at this and then lock this down, is you guys can think about what type of things would someone who's exceeding be doing versus someone who is meeting or developing. So one thought I would have as you go into this is a student who is exceeding would be aiming to get winners in this back court small box area. Okay, students who are only meeting or developing might not be able to get outright winners into this box because their placement isn't down as much. And that to me would be something that would be able to help us distinguish between different levels. Okay, and here's a rubric that we prepared earlier. So, for example, someone who's exceeding is hitting the shuttle consistently deep into the corners, and they're using both short and long shots. They're also using angles and using shots depending on the opponent's position. So if the opponent's at the back, they're dropping the shuttle short. So these are some things that you can go through. The cognitive assessment is one based on a reproducible that Seth Martin's put on the Voxer tab from Mitchell, Griffin and Oslin's book. And then there's another affective game assessment. I also put a link in, just to finish off, of an example sheet that I have developed for Tag Rugby about how you can collate all this information. So I created a Google Sheet. And in the Google Sheet, and this takes a while to load because I've got, what you do is you set up a front sheet where all the scores for all these different items. So this is my Tag Rugby or Touch Rugby. So if we go to off the ball play, if I assign a grade of 3, 2 and 1, and here's the rubric here that I'm using to assess, then and this is available on the Tozzle, or you can do it. Then what you'll see on the overall grading is that now these students have been assigned a 3, 2 and 1. So automatically helps you collate grades for different students. Now, the interesting thing is, you're going to say to me, well, why aren't you making any comments about students? Well, you don't need to, because this is a student who gets 3, a student is sharp, a student who gets 2 is proactive and hides, and a student who gets 1 is passive and static. So a student can, if they get a rating of 2 on off the ball play, they know they're somewhere in the middle here. So they can go to those behaviors. You can prompt them to look at those before they go to their next bout of gameplay. Okay, so this is a sheet that you can engage in at your leisure. Send me some questions about. These are some games that I've developed for rugby, and there's also a 2 versus 1 scenario where this is a GIF of the 2 versus 1 scenario, and these are the principles of the 2v1. And this is how we set it up, and this is the rubric or the rating scale that you use to assess the students based on that. So I basically tried to get all the information into like a little one-stop shop on this document. Okay, so the take-home messages are, obviously we must assess in PE for accountability and learning. We want to use formative and criterion assessments as much as possible. We need to plan what our assessments are going to be and make sure it's related to our unit objectives, but we don't want to overcook the goose, so to speak. And we don't want teachers because this is what I hear a lot of teachers don't want to use game-centered approaches because they don't know how to assess student learning within. So I've tried to provide a few examples to get your wheels turning so that you have a little bit more confidence if you want to get down and start using a game-centered approach. Now, my last thing is, these game performance rubrics, the ones that are here, are not yet validated, and what we want is a little bit of help to do this. So I might send an email out to you. I've got approval to do this research project from my institutional review board. There's a survey here on Qualtrics where you have to do drag and drops to help me devise the rubrics and rating scales for different behaviors. There's a link to this on the Tozzle as well. So it'll take you 15 or 20 minutes. It's an invasion game, and there will be questions about basketball, ultimate frisbee and soccer. And what you've got to do is drag and drop the items that describe whether someone is meeting, exceeding, or is just developing in the certain areas, and that information is described. So there you go. So as you're getting down to 8 o'clock here, have a think about summing up some of your learning here. And I know we went pretty quick at the end, so I really apologize about that, but you won't be able to do all 3 of these things, but I would get you to pick one of these 3 things. So tell me, for example, one thing you're going to do on the Tozzle before 30 days pass. So it might be, I'm going to develop a rubric to use with one of my modified badminton games that I use in my unit. And you might not be yet delivering sessions using a game-centered approach, but you might be using games. So that might be one thing you're going to do. So have a little bash at this while we deal with a couple of the questions coming in. I am looking a little bit at the Tozzle and seeing some comments on there, and I really appreciate people giving some positive feedback and giving me a big pat on the back. So that is wonderful, and it makes it worth my while getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and coming to do this presentation. And I do appreciate William getting on quickly and promptly with me this morning to make sure my connection was live, and Colin and the Physiology team. One useless bit of information is Colin was one of our, when I was a graduate student at Oregon State working with Dr. Hans van der Maas, Colin Brooks was one of our students.
Hey,
so that's my claim to fame. So I had some moderate, small influence on Colin, and what a wonderful professional he's turned out to be. So there you go. So if you have questions, you can email me. There's some references. So get in touch, and we can maybe deal with a couple of quick questions that people have.
Awesome. Stephen, that is great information. And I know people will definitely use your resources to access, and I love your action plan at the end, where we're just calling people to not only just be consumers of the information, but to actually use the information and apply it. And as I was telling you when we were talking, I'm actually looking at modifying the TGFU for the high school kids. I know it's typically middle school and elementary, but I really see a value in trying this in high school and modifying a little bit. And you know what's funny? You even said it, the assessment piece. It was where I'm very data driven, instruction oriented. I have to have the data so I can give proper feedback to my kids. I can quantify things with my administration. You know, they want to know if learning is happening in my classroom, and I need to be able to show that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to building some rubrics and using some of yours, so I don't have to recreate the wheel.
No, and that's what we want people to do. If you do that research project, you'll do the drag and drops, and it'll build the rubric. You won't get to see it, but once you've done the survey, if you email me, I actually have a Dropbox where I have a lot of the game performance rubrics all together. So if people want access to that, I'll either drop it onto the Tozzle, the link to that Dropbox, or people can email me. I'll try and get it onto the Tozzle here real quick. So that would be really useful.
Well, awesome.
We had a question real quick on what do you see the future of assessment in PE looking like? I think that we're going to get down to a fine art with technology. I think some of the ideas that Adam Lavore and Mel shared yesterday on getting feedback and automating processes. I know Terry Drains just put something out where she's using Autocrat to send notes home to parents. And I think that those type of automated systems are very, very good. Coach Jerry is also saying about video analysis. I use video, so I set up a GoPro and I link it to my Apple iPad, and I sample. I have that pointed towards a specific game. I press the button and for like 30 seconds, and then I stop it. So I'm not using BAM video delay, but then I walk up, stop that game, and then give students the iPad and get them to watch it. And then they can, watching that video for 30 seconds prompts them to get into this debate of ideas, and then they go back to the game form. And what I would do is not necessarily focus on assessing that discussion, but obviously assessing the psychomotor performance within those games. So that's how I would incorporate using and Bob's just putting on BAM video delay, and certainly setting up an iPad with BAM video delay on for each game, you know, on a say 32-minute delay, 30-second 2-minute delay, and then getting students to come get around that iPad and watch it back is a very good idea. All
Yeah,
right.
it's funny. I even just do simple iPads, and when you videotape on an iPad, you can actually control the speed with your fingers of how fast it goes. So yeah, it's with the technology available today, I definitely see it playing a big role in assessment.
Yeah, and the final thing I would say is I'm not saying, I haven't told you you should peer assess, you should
Right.
self-assess. It's kind of up to you what you want to get out of it. You got to decide, what are the things I want to assess as a teacher? What things can I give to students to do? And you might determine the complexity of the rubrics and things like that might not determine. And if you want to use video to get discussion going, then you go for it. I'm all over all these ideas, and I do use some of those ideas in the classroom as well.
Well, awesome. Awesome. Well, Stephen, again, thank you for taking your Sunday morning away from some valuable sleep and your family, just sharing your expertise. I know the people that are watching, that will watch, they are the game changers of physical education, and they are, I hope, will not only impact their kids, but they will also impact the people that are around them, that they'll take what they've learned and they'll be the next Phys Ed Summit presenters. They will be the presenters at their district conferences, their state conferences, and that we can continue to share such really, really good practices. So, Stephen, again, I truly appreciate your time, and everybody that's been following along on Tazzle. I hope that you have a great morning, a great afternoon, and a good night.
Thank you, everyone.